Broadcasting from our office in Buffalo, New York, this is the Arrive Podcast, the comprehensive guide to U.S. immigration law designed especially for our Canadian neighbors. I'm Jeremy Richards, your host, along with my co-host and business partner, Christine Jarusik. We bring decades of immigration law experience helping Canadians to live and work in the United States. We're here to simplify the complexities of the U.S. immigration process, answer your questions, and provide insights that only experienced professionals can provide. In each episode, Christine and I will delve into legal concepts, share personal narratives, and bring you insightful conversations, all designed to educate, enlighten, and empower you as you navigate the U.S. immigration law landscape. Whether you're preparing to move to the United States for work, studies, love, or if you're just intrigued by U.S. immigration law, the Arrive Podcast is your resource for making the journey clearer, simpler, and more approachable. So we invite you to come on this journey with us. Listen to the Arrive Podcast, follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, and subscribe to the latest episodes as they are released. And if you find what we share helpful, don't keep it to yourself. Feel free to share it with others who might also benefit from the content. Our mission is to assist our friends from the North in successfully navigating their way to live and work in the United States. So sit back, tune in, and get ready to arrive. This is the Arrive Podcast, the U.S. immigration law podcast for Canadians. So today we have an interesting topic. Today we're going to be talking about entering Canada with a DUI or a criminal conviction. So this somewhat applies to Canadians, but definitely applies to relatives of Canadians or friends of Canadians and those that are going to Canada for business, for leisure, whatever your purpose is in Canada. And we're going to discuss the impact that a DUI would have on your ability to go into Canada and any other criminal conviction for that matter, and what it does to your potential ability to do business, to vacation, take a cruise, fly to Canada, go to Canada for any purpose by any means for that matter. So First off, what are the main obstacles to entering Canada if you have a DUI on your record, Christine?
All right. So if you're a Canadian citizen, there's no obstacle, right? So we get calls sometimes from Canadian citizens that say, "Hey, I got a DUI while I was down on vacation in Florida, and now am I gonna have a hard time going back to Canada?" Well, no, you're not. You're a Canadian citizen, so you don't have to be concerned about a criminal record in another country. It's not going to prevent you from entering Canada. That law does not apply to you. Who it does apply to is foreign nationals. So people who are not citizens of Canada or permanent residents of Canada and don't have a right to enter Canada, they are going to be considered criminally inadmissible in certain instances and possibly have to make an application in order to be considered admissible to Canada. So the legal obstacle really comes from the immigration law in Canada in connection with the criminal law of Canada, because what the immigration law says is if you commit a crime outside of Canada that if it was committed in Canada would be considered a criminal conviction, and that includes DUIs. So you're trapped by the interaction between those two laws and you become inadmissible to Canada in certain instances. Now, there's some exceptions. Sometimes the passage of time can cure things. Making an application can sometimes cure things. Sometimes you can get a border officer on a good day who will admit you. But typically speaking, if you have a DUI, you should consult with an immigration lawyer, a Canadian immigration lawyer, to find out whether you're inadmissible before you go.
And Christine is a Canadian immigration lawyer, and that's why she's speaking to this and not me. I know nothing about it. But if you are Canadian, however, and you do get a DUI in the U.S. or you are convicted of another crime in the U.S., it's not going to impact your ability to go to Canada, but depending on what it is, it could impact your ability to come back to the United States.
Right.
So if you go rob a bank in the U.S. and you get a felony bank robbery, then, well, you might need a waiver to come back to the United States in the future.
Right.
So It
you gotta
will
think
impact your ability to come to the U.S., not to go back to your home country, but it could impact your ability to come to the U.S. And in general, a simple DUI does not keep Canadians from coming to the United States. Now, if you have multiple DUIs, or if you have a DUI that rises to, and you can speak to this
Yeah, if
better
it's
than
more
me.
serious, like bodily injury or property damage was involved and you were charged with something beyond just a simple DUI, you would need a waiver to come back to the U.S. in a lot of cases.
So your criminal convictions in Canada or the U.S. could impact your ability to come to the U.S. if you're Canadian.
Right. And one thing to keep in mind, and we get a lot of calls on this, is, hey, I've been able to travel throughout the world. I've been to Italy. I've been all over the world to every country. And now I want to go to Canada. And it really seems like Canada is the one that's very strict on DUIs, where it doesn't impact your travel. So just because you've been able to travel internationally to other countries doesn't mean you're admissible to Canada.
So how long, if you do get a DUI conviction, how long is that going to impact your ability to go to Canada?
Okay, so this isn't a really straightforward answer. It depends, right? So if you have a really old DUI conviction and you have only one on your record and it happened before 2018 and it's more than 10 years old, there's a chance you could be deemed admissible or to Canada. So you were inadmissible for a period of time, but because enough time has passed since the completion of your conviction, and that time period is 10 years or more, you may be admissible to Canada in that instance. But what would prevent that from happening is if you were to have any other conviction on your record, possibly, or if that conviction was more recent. So, it's something you should definitely consult with an immigration lawyer before going to Canada, even in an instance where you have a really old DUI, because there's certain implications. So, for example, if it was a more serious DUI and it was bodily injury, property damage, something like that, you may have been convicted of something in combination with that DUI that would make you inadmissible and ineligible for deemed rehabilitation.
So if you do have a DUI that's preventing you from going to Canada, how do you overcome that?
So you have a couple ways you can overcome it. There's a permanent way to overcome it. So if more than 5 years has passed since the completion of the conviction or the completion of the sentence, then you can make an application for rehabilitation. And that application is filed with a consulate in your home country. It's adjudicated by that consulate outside of Canada, and they will make a determination that this offense no longer makes you inadmissible to Canada. If the hard part is it takes sometimes, I shouldn't say sometimes, in the US, it definitely takes over a year. Other countries, it can be a lot more quickly adjudicated, but it's not a quick turnaround. So you have to really plan for this in advance of any travel to Canada. Like, you want to talk to a lawyer about, 18 months before you go, before you have plans to travel. Now, if you need to go to Canada more quickly, say there's an emergency or you have a family member there, or you have a work reason to go, you can make an application for what's called a temporary resident permit. Now, unlike rehabilitation, this is going to only be a temporary cure.
So rehabilitation's permanent if you get it. You don't have to ever do it again.
It's permanent unless you reoffend. So it will permanently overcome.
Assuming you don't do anything else.
Yeah.
Once you get criminal rehabilitation, you're good for the rest of your life.
You should be good for the rest of your life unless you reoffend. Yeah.
A temporary resident permit is just that, just for one visit,
so
or
it
multiple
can
visits?
It depends. So you apply for it and you ask for the time you need in Canada. So it may be one trip. Hey, I need to go. I'm a salesperson and I have sales meetings in Canada and I need to go for a week in July. Or I have a family trip, and I need to go for this period of time. Or it may be more ongoing. So I have a son and he lives in Canada and I need to be able to visit him on an ongoing basis. Then they may issue it for a period of up to 3 years.
Oh.
I rarely see them issue it for more than 12 months. Even in an instance where you may have a minor child that's living in Canada, 12 months is usually what the outside of what we can get for a TRP.
So one of the ones we often get questioned about is taking a cruise to Canada, right? You're gonna go on a cruise to Canada. You're gonna take vacation to Canada. Maybe you have to fly to Canada to then jump on a cruise, and it's an Alaskan cruise or something, or you jump on the cruise in the U.S. and then it ends up in Canada, and then you fly back out of Canada.
Yeah.
So if you don't qualify if you want criminal rehabilitation, you need to plan a year and a half ahead of that.
Yeah, and a lot
vacation.
of people who go on cruises, they book these things, a year and a half in advance. So we can help them get rehabilitated usually before they even go on their cruise.
So if you can and you get a temporary resident permit,
yep.
So you would ask for it to cover that entire vacation, right?
Typically, yes. It depends what your travel.
So what if you go? Let's
like.
say you're traveling and you go. And you start in the United States,
yep.
and let's say you hit Alaska, and then you go somewhere in Canada, and then you go back to the U.S., and then you go back to Canada. You don't have to keep getting a new temporary resident permit during that trip, do you?
So no, you would probably ask for the consulate to approve it for the whole period of the trip so that you're covered. Now, the hard part comes in, the consulate's taking about 4 to 5 months to make decisions on these temporary resident permits. So if you're doing a last minute trip to Canada, you may be stuck with the worst option for an application, which is a border application. And I say it's the worst, not because they're not approvable, but because you're left at the mercy of a border officer.
Yeah, you have this cruise, this flight, and you could miss it.
You're at their discretion, right? So they may or may not approve it on the basis of the information provided. And we put together a really solid package for people to make border applications and have a call with them before they go so they know how to approach the situation. But my advice always is like, hey, these guys have the discretion to deny this. If they decide you're not going on your cruise, or you're not going on your flight, that's the answer. And you can't really argue with them. You can present your case, you can present the documentation, but there is a risk you're not going to be admitted. So you may want to postpone that travel. Or, for example, people that like to fly out of Pearson or out of a Canadian airport because they have a lot of nice direct flights to, foreign destinations. It's better just if you really want to make that trip, book that flight out of a U.S. destination. You might have to pay a little more for the flight, maybe a little more inconvenient. Maybe you're not traveling with your group, but you're not going to risk being denied entry and being able to make your flight.
So if you're deemed rehabilitated, what does that mean when it comes to a DUI?
Okay, so it's just like having an approval of rehabilitation, right? So by the passage of time, the Canadian government has deemed that your offense no longer makes you inadmissible to Canada. So it's outside
of the window that they care.
It's outside of the window. But the concern I have with deemed rehabilitation is, number one, your offense needs to fall within certain parameters. It needs to be considered minor in nature. That involves
so the severity of the offense can impact your ability to be deemed rehabilitated.
Absolutely. So if it's something more serious, you're never going to be automatically forgiven.
So in that case, you need criminal rehabilitation.
You would need criminal rehabilitation. And people making their own adjudication as to whether this is considered minor or major need to really know Canadian criminal law, because the comparison needs to be made between what you were...
and U.S. criminal, right?
Correct.
Don't you need both?
Yes. So you need to understand the criminal law of the state you were convicted in and the criminal law of Canada and be able to do what's called comparative law analysis and compare those two offenses and determine whether or not this is going to be considered major or minor in Canadian law. And, really the only one who's qualified to do that is somebody who is qualified to practice law in the United States and in Canada. So this kind of excludes those Canadian immigration consultants. They're just not qualified to do that analysis for people.
Well, even you'll see just U.S. immigration lawyers trying to do this that don't have Canadian training, right?
Sure.
They don't have a Canadian law license, and vice versa. You'll see a Canadian lawyer, but that doesn't have any background in U.S.
criminal
law,
law,
right?
Yep.
So duly qualified is really what you're looking for here. Avoid consultants like the plague. We say this all the time for anything when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, you definitely need to ask.
They do not have the same level of training, expertise, licensure requirements, the same requirements for professional liability insurance. When you're working with individuals like that, not only you're not getting the level of advice that you would get from an attorney, but they're also not held accountable like attorneys are either. So you win in many different ways when you go to the proper licensed professional.
Sure. And if you're doing something simple, like you've got one DUI conviction and, it's a pretty straightforward situation, an immigration consultant in Canada may be able to handle something like that. But you get one step beyond that simplicity.
I mean, how many convictions have you seen people show up with?
Oh my gosh, everything under the sun that you can imagine.
I remember when you had the other day, it was like 8. It started with like 1 or 2, and then when you got the record, it was like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Like,
so
whoa.
Sometimes people forget, right? So you might have a little bit of a checkered past or a, misspent youth, and you actually chalked up more convictions than you recall. And that happens sometimes. I talk to people and they're like, oh, I think I only have 3 convictions. And then we get the rap sheet and it's more like 10 or 12 that we have to address, something complex like that or something more serious. So I've had someone be approved for rehabilitation who did 7 years in a federal penitentiary. This was a pretty serious conviction, but we were able to make a strong argument for them on the basis of their factual situation. So don't think it's impossible that you'll never be allowed back into Canada, certainly with the passage of time. And if you're living a very, honorable lifestyle after that, and you've really rehabilitated yourself, there's a case to be made there.
And with entering Canada on a DUI, I think I ran into situations where I've been with clients at the border, and this is coming into the U.S., but it's very similar. And they'll ask the client, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Yeah.
Or committed
That's a common
any
question.
violations, right? That's a standard question when
Yeah.
you're entering the U.S., going to Canada, if you're going through secondary screening. They're
Sure.
going to ask you these questions. And then I've had clients tell the officer, no, I haven't. And then you sit down with the client. I immediately look over at the client and it's, are you sure? And then the client will say, well, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So
or they told me that, yeah, I did.
When
but
I was
they
a
told
kid,
me
or
that
it
I
was
was
sealed,
or it's
or
expunged.
It's
Yeah.
expunged. No, it's not. So for immigration purposes, you need to understand that these things will follow you the rest of your life. You may be deemed rehabilitated, right? Or there may be a solution to it, but you can't hide from it. And that's where I'm going. You can't hide from these things.
Right.
You may not want to talk about it. And maybe, you're a former and you've been rehabilitated and are a completely different person. You may have been a dumb kid when you did it. Whatever the circumstances were, honesty. You need to disclose everything because Canada and the U.S. share their records.
Oh, yeah.
So they're sharing this. You can't, just because you got it in the U.S. doesn't mean that Canada's not going to know about it, or vice versa. If you got it in Canada, the U.S. isn't going to know about it. They will know. They share those documents. They share those records. So when they're searching and they're asking you these questions, they're asking for a reason. And if they start to dig their feet in and ask about certain things, be honest. Answer that question. If you have it, then deal with it.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to hide and run from it.
Yeah, Canada and the U.S. really started sharing this information after 9/11, and it really came to a head. I would say around 2008, we started seeing people getting denied entry for DUIs and other convictions in the U.S. a little bit more frequently. And now it's like,
Post 2018.
Oh my gosh, all the information is on the computer somewhere, and Canada has access to everything in the U.S. We're seeing stuff pop up for people. I get calls all the time. I've been traveling to Canada for 25 years and never had a problem. One officer asked me if I had a conviction, and I said no because, it's never stopped me before. And they pulled up my record and found some conviction from 30 years ago, and now I can't go to Canada. So can you help me? This is what we're seeing.
And that's common, right?
Right.
And you just brought up a good point. Just because you visited it in the past, and depending on when it was in the past,
right,
it may have not come up because it may have been prior to when they shared records, right? Or had access to that information. So just because you visited in the past, just because you went on a cruise or came for business or whatever it was, doesn't mean they don't have access to it now. So if you came 10 years ago, they may have overlooked it, may not have known about it.
Or maybe you went last week and you had an officer that just didn't dig deeply. You could go back today and get a different officer who's asked the right questions, presses the right buttons on the computer, and there up pops your record. So, you really should address these things, especially if you travel frequently, you have a need to be there, maybe you have property or family there. It's worth a conversation just to find out what the situation is specifically for your your factual background, and whether or not you have to worry about this, or if there's something you should be carrying with you or applying for in order to ensure travel.
Yeah, it's the smile and a wave approach, right?
Well, yeah, we're
Sometimes
American,
you get that
right?
officer,
So,
hey,
yeah.
what are you doing? I'm just going to the casino. All right, have a good day.
Yeah.
And they don't do anything else.
No.
But if that officer digs a little bit,
Yeah.
swipes your passport, you better be prepared.
Yeah, if they have more questions, you want to be able to understand the situation and be able to address those.
So if I'm going to Canada for business or pleasure, does that impact my ability to enter Canada with a DUI or other conviction?
So it doesn't matter when you're looking at a rehabilitation application. So maybe it's been more than 5 years since the completion of your sentence and you want to apply for rehabilitation. We include your reason for travel to Canada, but that's not what they're weighing in making their decision as to whether or not you'd be approved for that. They're really weighing the severity of your offense, which only a qualified immigration lawyer can make a determination on that, versus your rehabilitation factors, okay? And those rehabilitation factors look a lot like all those changes in your life that have taken place since you offended. So if you graduated, if you got a really great job, or you've just had steady employment, or if you have a family now, or you got married, or you volunteer with your church, or you've just lived a more stable lifestyle even, you can demonstrate that you're a changed person. You're no longer doing the things that caused you to offend in the first place. You could be considered rehabilitated. When you're traveling to Canada on a temporary resident permit, that's when your reason for travel really comes into play here. Okay, so we're looking at in those instances, we're weighing the severity of the offense against your reason for travel. And if your reason for travel is really strong, say for example, you have a family member or a friend in Canada that is, God forbid, diagnosed with a terminal illness, but your offense is pretty serious, that humanitarian need of that Canadian citizen to see you before passing really could outweigh any serious convictions. So I've had someone, that we got a temporary resident permit for that had multiple DUI convictions, some of them very serious in their past, and happened to reoffend I want to say weeks before we made this temporary resident permit application. They just had not changed their life at all. They were an alcoholic. They were allowed to enter Canada because their reason to go to Canada was to see that friend who wrote a very compelling letter and who was diagnosed with a stage 4 terminal cancer. And they were allowed for a temporary period to go to Canada to see that person. Which I thought was very compassionate on the part of the Canadian immigration authorities. They really look to the reason in those instances. Now, if you want to go to Canada for a fishing trip and you have a pretty minor conviction, that might work too, right? Say you have something minor in the past.
But if you have a severe conviction and you just want to go fishing.
Yeah, that might not balance out in your favor, right? Although we've had some success for certain cases.
Snowmobiling, fishing, hunting. Those are like the common things that for leisure that people want to do.
But that's what they're weighing. And, they make their own determination on that. I have, a good idea of whether or not you may or may not be successful in these instances. And a lot of people just say, hey, you know what? I really want to go on this trip. I just want to try. And sometimes we're happily surprised with a good result in those instances.
And we already hit on the fact that if you're Canadian and you're in the U.S. and you offend, you're Canadian. Canada's going to let you back.
Yep.
But again, it could impact your ability to come to the United States.
Yep. And then you need to talk to someone like our attorney, Shauna McLean, who does all the waiver applications for the U.S.
If you think the waiver process to Canada is tough, try the waiver process to the U.S. It's pretty grueling too.
Yeah, well, they don't give you a permanent. So Canada is great because they give you that permanent rehabilitation application. And even though it takes a while to get it. Yeah, in the U.S., there's no permanent one. You got to keep renewing that for the rest of your life.
There are permanent ones in certain situations, but some stuff you can't ever get it for, right? Like say you have fraud. You have to get a waiver every 5 years.
It's definitely.
You may never be able to even immigrate to the U.S. because of whatever your offense might have been. So.
Yeah, it's kind of, I feel like for the U.S., it may be more straightforward to determine whether or not you're inadmissible.
Yes.
Because of the way the law is written, but it's
Limited.
it's limited and can be harder to overcome.
Yep. So if you have family members that are trying to visit Canada and they have a DUI or a past criminal conviction, there might be a solution. They may already be deemed rehabilitated because of the passage of time, or they may qualify for a temporary resident permit or criminal rehabilitation to be able to enter Canada. The key here, though, is planning. If you've noticed throughout the conversation, if you have an upcoming event and it's a week or two away, you may be out of luck. You're going to be at the discretion of that border officer. Whereas if you have a trip planned next year, that's really when you should be considering these options and talking to someone like Christine, who can look at your criminal convictions in the United States and then compare them against Canadian law and determine what your remedies might be. So with anything immigration, whether it's going to Canada or the United States, plan ahead. If you're going to do last minute, then your options are going to decrease significantly. And with these things, when you're going to a wedding or you have this vacation been planning for years and these big events in your life, we know how important they are to people. So we can help in the right situations as long as you give us the proper time and ability to help you. So please,
we have had a couple
ahead.
calls lately too for people that want to go to Taylor Swift concerts. So
there you go.
Another important life event.
It is for a lot of people,
Absolutely.
right? I know my daughter would give anything for Taylor Swift concert. So hopefully you were able to learn something today about entering Canada with the DUI. Thank you for tuning in as always. And if you have any friends or family or anybody out there that would find this content is interesting or would apply to them, please share it. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so. And again, thank you for listening and have a great day.